Hello, in this presentation we will be explaining how the reform will work. So having given you all of that background as to the motivation and the factors that concern us, and hence the reason why we are proposing a reform of the financing method, now I would like to speak to you about the proposed method of financing that we are putting forward. First, we begin with why the per-student approach. This is a comparison between per-student method of financing and other financing models. Essentially, a number of financing options are available to us. One option is simply a line item option, in which schools would submit to us line item budgets and we would then fund them according to those line items. Another method is via a global budget, in which a budget is allocated perhaps by region to be divided up among the schools in that region. Yet another model is a per-student model, where schools are financed based on the amount of students that they have. And private pay is a fourth model, in which the client or the students would pay for school services. And finally, there is the hybrid public-private model. Those are the options, but we have to be mindful of four objectives in deciding on which option is most suitable. It is our objective in education to focus on equity and access, to promote efficiency and effectiveness, to improve quality, to keep costs down, and to ensure that we get value for money. Evaluating these various options against these objectives, then, that is how we arrived that the per-student model was the model that would help us to achieve our objectives to the greatest extent. Here is a comparison of the various models against the objectives that we have just stated. You see the objectives, and we measure each method of financing against that objective. You will note, for example, that line item budgeting does very little for encouraging equity and access, or efficiency and effectiveness, or promoting quality, or enhancing value for money. The same is true for the global budget. Private pay will certainly not help us to achieve equity and access, since the costs are borne by the user, and those who are unable to pay will therefore not be able to access. It also does not encourage efficiency and effectiveness. It could have a positive effect on quality and on cost containment. It does not necessarily lead to value for money. If we look at the per-student models, and there are several variations of the per-student that are provided here. In the first case, you have a flat per-student model, in which a flat amount is given per student. That model, as you notice, will not encourage equity and access. It does promote efficiency and effectiveness, since it is encouraging that schools utilize their resources most effectively, delivering services to the students that they have in the most efficient and effective way. It does not necessarily promote quality. It does help keep costs contained, and it does encourage value for money. However, the flat per-student model can be enhanced if we add adjusters. We note that if we add adjusters, that we can add adjusters that will promote equity and efficiency and effectiveness. Still, we could add adjusters as well as a performance component, and that will maximize our achieving our various objectives. For example, where you have the flat with just the adjusters for equity and access, you note that that did not necessarily lead to an enhancement of quality. However, if we add a performance adjustment, then we could encourage quality as well. It is this model then that we are proposing, a per-student model, but with adjusters to promote access and equity and to promote improvement in quality. What are the principles of the per-student model? First, we want to ensure equity or fairness for all. We want to ensure that every student gets a fair share of public resources in order to achieve success. Secondly, we want a system that is transparent, easy to understand, clear in its criteria for the allocation of resources. Third, we want to ensure a system that is accountable. A school that receives resources because it has students with certain characteristics of learning needs has the responsibility of providing the kinds of programs and services to meet those needs. They should be accountable to their clients. Fourth, the system we propose must be sustainable. Changes in the system have to be implemented progressively in order to guarantee financial sustainability of schools and to avoid dramatic changes of resources in 1 year. Fifth, we must also have a system that promotes equity, one that ensures that those students with special educational needs and those students that are economically disadvantaged will have a fair chance at getting an education. In this regard, equity does not necessarily mean equal, but equity means that you get a fair share according to your needs. Finally, the system must have built-in continuous evaluation. It has to be a system that can be evaluated and can be adjusted constantly over time to ensure that it is at all times achieving the objectives for which it is intended. Here are some more principles of the system. First of all, it is per student, meaning that resources will be allocated based on the number of students and the number of credits that the students are actually taking in a given school. The number of credits, the model is based on the assumption that the public purse ought to finance a standard curriculum to which all students should have access. The assumption here is that we will be establishing a national curriculum, a standard curriculum at the secondary level of 40 credits per week in all 4 forms. We are also proposing that the cost of this curriculum should be 0 or certainly very close to 0 for all students. Third, the model will allow for those students who are either economically disadvantaged or with special academic needs to be granted more funds so that the school can adequately support them to ensure their success. Fifth, the model allows for a performance bonus to be included, which would be to incentivize schools to improve their quality and their efficiency and effectiveness. And the model should also allow schools to meet the basic costs of operating in order to deliver on the minimum standards that we desire. It will also therefore allow us to ensure that the curriculum that is provided to all students will not see some students at a greater advantage than other students. So final payment in the model will be on the basis of 3 components, and which we now discuss. To estimate the financing needs of high schools, the model includes 3 parts. 1, the cost of school services. In other words, what does it cost a school to deliver school services, teaching and non-teaching services to students? 2, what additional compensations we might need to give to a school depending on the characteristics of the students it takes in. Certainly we would agree that students with special academic needs and students with socioeconomic disadvantage should be provided with a little bit more resources for the school to be able to deliver adequate services to guarantee their success. And finally, one of the objectives that we strongly believe in is that it should encourage quality and efficiency in the school, and therefore a third component of the model is the inclusion of a performance bonus that will serve to incentivize quality improvement and efficiency improvement. Therefore, what are we proposing? We're proposing a grant allocation per school, or a GAS to be short. That grant allocation per school will include a school services grant, a compensation-based grant, and a performance-based grant. The grant allocation to schools per school will allow the school to deliver a standard curriculum of 40 credits. That standard curriculum of 40 credits would constitute both core and electives. There will be a list of subjects, main and elective, that will be provided to students without charging fees or at a very minimal fee. The grant therefore should allow the covering of this standard curriculum of 40 credits per week. Any other elective subjects outside of the standard curriculum, in other words, what might be termed the non-standard curriculum that the school wishes to offer, the school will have to identify its own resources for delivering such non-standard curriculum. That it may do by charging those students wishing to pursue those courses additional fees. How do we calculate the grant allocation per school? To estimate school services, the formula includes A, the annual teaching expenditures, and B, non-teaching salaries and other administrative costs, utilities, maintenance, etc., which were estimated as a percent of the salary cost. The grant allocation to schools then, as we already indicated, included a school services grant, a compensation grant, and a performance grant. The school services grant will be calculated on the cost per student per credit times the number of students times the number of credits those students were taking at that school. If you had 100 students taking 40 credits, that's 4,000 credits, and if the cost per credit was $1, then the school services grant would have been $4,000 for those 100 students taking those 40 credits. The compensation-based grant seeks to provide additional adjustments or compensations for students with special academic needs or that are economically disadvantaged. Therefore, a school with these students would be given additional grants to compensate for the additional services that would be required to ensure that these students are successful. Calculating the compensation component is done by multiplying the cost per student per credit times a factor of 1.1 times the number of credits those students are taking at the school times the number of students with special academic needs and students that are economically disadvantaged. Why a factor of 1.1? Because it was estimated based on practices internationally that it takes about 1 times 1 as much cost to educate students with special academic needs and socioeconomic disadvantage. Finally, the performance bonus. We have not yet developed the parameters of this performance bonus, but certainly indicators that might be used to calculate the performance bonus would be performance of students on exams, repetition and dropout rates, efficiency in use of resources, student and or parent satisfaction. These are all parameters that can be used to calculate an index that could determine the performance bonus that any school might be given, all designed to encourage quality in the school. How did we determine the cost per student per credit? Well, essentially we added up what it would cost in terms of teachers, in terms of materials and supplies, in terms of administration, in terms of the classroom needs to deliver a given subject, and we did this across all subjects assuming 40 credits. This we estimated as the cost of delivering the 40 credits per week of school services. We then took that cost and we were able to determine its breakdown in terms of the teaching and non-teaching, other expenses, materials and supplies, utilities, etc. And this is how we estimated what the child at 40 credits. This concludes our explanation of how the reform will work.